200,000 years ago, the modern human has fully taken shape. The larynx, or voice box, which is high up in the throat in our ancestors, descends. More complex sounds are now possible. We begin to speak. For the first time, information can be shared between individuals and across generations. Humans have gained a critical advantage over every other creature on Earth.
You can tell my grandfather said that when the elephants didn't show up, we go off and hunted zebras. You know, my aunt told me that her cousin found this water hole on the other side of that river.
And we can all benefit and we can all understand what they mean when they're describing what they found out on that landscape.
Language changes humans from being like standalone computers to being networked computers, where you can share information. You know, one doesn't need to depend on one's own personal experience. One can borrow the personal experience of anyone with whom one can communicate. That's a powerful advantage. No other creature has that.
As a species, humans become exponentially smarter. The global game board has been set, and we are now ready to play. 100,000 years ago, man can move. We have agile hands and primitive tools. We can communicate and control fire. We are finally ready to expand out of our African home on a path millions of years in the making. Shifting continents have linked Africa and Eurasia into the largest contiguous landmass on Earth, Afro-Eurasia. 33 million square miles, more than twice the surface area of our entire moon. For early humans, this means more than half the land on Earth can be reached on foot.
Human dispersal was a crucial game changer. We are one of the few primates that live on more than one continent simultaneously. So what that means is that we're better insulated from the kinds of things that cause big mammals to become extinct than other primates are. It's extinction insurance. Dispersal is extinction insurance.
But just as the world begins to open itself up to man, the planet turns on us. An ice age begins. Now the planet will test us like never before. By 50,000 years ago, glaciers begin to advance down from the North Pole. At the same time, humans continue their conquest of the globe, arriving in China and Australia. By 30,000 years ago, Homo sapiens reach Europe for the first time. By 20,000 years ago, with the ice nearing its most extreme, the march of man reaches the frigid tundra of northeast Siberia. Despite the trials of the Ice Age, man endures and develops the last skills we will need to be truly human. The clues lie in these symbols. We have taken an intellectual leap to think beyond the here and now, beyond what is simply needed to survive.
We can only start saying we have an organism that is human, that is the same as us, when we start seeing evidence of symbolic thought. It's when we start seeing a picture of a cow that everybody will recognize as the picture of a cow. Because only when we start seeing all of those things can we say that is a human. People or creatures that think like us, that see the world in the same way as us.
And from that moment on, human history was marked to be radically different to any other species on this planet.
Now, with huge amounts of the planet's water locked up in ice, sea levels plummet by 300 to 400 feet. The last great barrier to the spread of man is erased. We come across the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia to North America. We are telling the history of the world in 2 hours, and in just 1 hour, more than 13 billion years have already passed. These years of preparation have allowed man to finally emerge and spread out across the planet. And human history as we know it can truly begin. Our history of the world began with the beginning of time, the Big Bang. It has taken us on a journey of nearly 14 billion years. Now, as humans take center stage, it's important to remember just how small a slice of history we actually occupy. To make things simple, imagine compressing 14 billion years of history down to just 14 years.
On this scale, the Earth would have existed only for the past 5 years. So that's about a third of the history of the universe. Large, complex creatures would have developed 7 months ago. On this scale, dinosaurs went extinct only about 3 weeks ago. The entire recorded history of humans would span only the last 3 minutes. Modern industrial societies, the Industrial Revolution effectively, 6 seconds ago. What this shows me is that we humans have been around for only a very brief instant in the recorded history of the universe.
Mankind has waited billions of years for our brief instant to shine, as the stars and our evolving planet carried out the slow work of organizing the elements in a way that would make human history possible. It's 10,000 BC, less than 100,000 years after expanding out of Africa. Man has reached South America. Humans have met the adversity of the Ice Age head-on, and rather than die off, we have adapted, become even more intelligent. And now we have colonized the entire globe. From coast to mountaintop, from tundra to desert, humans are there.
Our closest living ancestors, chimpanzees, live in the tropics. They only live in the tropics. Humans have managed to colonize the entire globe.
Ice Age land bridges allowed man to spread around the world. But now the ice begins to melt, and sea levels rise again. Humans are trapped and separated in 2 vast and unconnected hemispheres. Each pocket of humanity left to make the best of what it has been given. As the glaciers recede, they carve out lakes, rivers, and bays. The map as we know it emerges. In Africa, increased rainfall causes Lake Victoria and Lake Albert to overflow and form Egypt's Nile River. In Eurasia, other rivers emerge. The Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. The Indus in modern-day Pakistan, and China's Yellow and Yangtze.
These river valleys become critically important for how human history will now be played out following the retreat of these ice sheets.
These are the river valleys whose waters and fertile soils will allow the first seeds of civilization to be planted. With temperatures warming after the Ice Age, plants and animals are more plentiful, and man can finally choose to stop moving. Permanent settlements begin. Populations grow. With more mouths to feed, our ancestors have to get clever.
They had to find a way to increase the amount of food they could get from the surroundings.
Now, one discovery forever changes the planet and the path of mankind. We learn to plant seeds. And the seeds we sow come from the same plants that millions of years earlier spurred our evolution from ape to man. The unheralded hero of human history, grass.
A grass seed is tiny, right? It's no food. I can hunt a bison or I can take grass. I'm gonna hunt a bison, right? Ironically, grass seeds become the most important food crops in the world, but they're the things that are ignored by hunter-gatherers for thousands and thousands of years. People don't start using them until they absolutely have to use them.
Some of the species of grass that we are most familiar with includes sugarcane. It includes wheat and rye and barley. All of the cereal crops are types of grass. So it's not just that beautiful green lawn that we measure our middle-class success from. It's also the staple crop upon which civilization depends. It is the majority of our calorie intake.
Once again, it all goes back to the Big Bang. Central to the story of all life is our competition for that energy created at the beginning of time. Just as oxygen gave us an edge, just as fire allowed us to consume more calories. Switching to farming is an energy revolution. A hunter-gatherer needs 10 square miles of territory to provide himself with enough sustenance, enough energy in the form of plants and meat to survive. A farmer can harvest the sun's energy so efficiently, he can fulfill his needs using only 1/10 of a square mile of land. In the warming after the last ice age, farming begins to take hold in 6 places around the globe. But by the fortunes of geography, no place in the ancient world has a better concentration of plants and animals that can be domesticated than the Middle East's Fertile Crescent.
In the Middle East, we have this remarkable convergence of species that seem to have been susceptible to domestication, both plants and animals. In terms of animals, we're talking about cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats. In terms of plants, 2 varieties of wheat, rye, barley, lentils, figs.
Americas have very few wild species that can be easily domesticated. One animal that gives any human who can tame it an almost unbeatable edge is the horse. It's a little-known fact that although horses first evolved in the Americas, they died out there along with many other large mammals around 10,000 BC.
There were at least 3 species of Ice Age horses in North America, maybe more. Some as small as ponies, some as big as Clydesdales. And they had evolved in North America for 40 million years. They're part of the whole history, and then they're gone. They're gone.
These powerful potential allies disappear before they can be used by the first North Americans.
Fortunately, before that happened, large numbers of horses escaped back across the Bering Strait land bridge and spread out across the great grasslands, the steppe of Central Eurasia.
A narrow escape that had a profound effect on human history. Around 4000 BC, nomadic people in Central Asia learned to tame them for the first time. Domesticated horses will be harnessed across Eurasia, advancing everything from work to warfare. Perhaps no other animal has had a bigger influence on the course of human history. And the circle wouldn't be complete for another 5,000 years, when Christopher Columbus would bring horses with him on his second voyage to the Americas. His horses would be the first to set hooves in the Americas since the Great Die-Off over 10,000 years earlier. "6,000 years ago, domestication of animals and plants sets the stage for the next phase of human history. Like clouds of interstellar dust gathering in material to form stars, a type of gravity is at work as places like Sumeria, located in part of the Fertile Crescent known as Mesopotamia, draw in people, support large populations, and spin up into centers of power and innovation. By 3000 BC, some of these Sumerian settlements can truly be called our first cities. One of them, Uruk, has around 50,000 people living in less than 1 square mile. A population density that rivals modern-day New York City. Humans have become so efficient at deriving energy from domesticated food that this land area, which would have supported only a single hunter-gatherer, now can support thousands. But a change in diet also triggers a new dependence.
Once you move to agriculture, you are depending for 80–90% of your calories on perhaps 1 or 2 species. In the case of the Middle East, wheat and barley. In the case of wheat and barley, they both ripen at about the same time. Humans have to gather the seeds at the same time. So now we have our food for the year that has arrived in one hit. It's like getting your salary paid once a year. You need to record it, you need to plan, because if inevitably your crop fails, you have famine, and you're not going to have another go for another 12 months.
In these first cities, crops are king. To keep track of them, our ancestors developed the first writing. To protect them, the first armies. And to administer them, the beginnings of politics.
When you have hundreds or thousands of people who are living together, there's simply too many people to sort of run around and create a census. It creates a need for government. It creates a need for some form of social and political hierarchy.
Planting seeds has set man on a new path. Settlements have grown into cities. But to take the next epic step from city to civilization, we'll need the help of a very surprising creature. "5,000 years ago, after wandering the earth for more than 100,000 years, mankind has begun to settle down. We cluster near rivers, along the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile, the Indus, the Yellow and Yangtze. Civilizations are about to take off. But first, they must all master one thing: trade. The more they exchange goods and learn from other lands, the faster they grow.
It seems that long-distance trade and communication is a necessary precursor to allow urban civilization as we know it.
And surprisingly, the first civilizations arise on the back of a creature with a lowly reputation in the modern world: the donkey. The donkey caravan is the interstate highway and high-speed internet of its day. Their routes will lay the groundwork for the modern world. Moving not only goods like timber and bronze, but ideas and stories. The civilizations they connect will be some of the first described in the Bible. The caravan routes converge at the Persian Gulf, where they link up with ships that carry goods to India.
It essentially brought these civilizations together into great cultural and material exchange, and really was the beginning of the trend towards globalization.
It is a key to understanding how our world works to this day. Just like the first civilizations, we trade and form networks. These networks form hubs. And throughout history, being at that hub has meant one thing.
The amount of ideas, the amount of cargo that passes through a region seems to have a direct correlation to how powerful and important they are.
By 2000 BC, humans have gone from humble huts to massive monuments. In Africa, great pyramids arise on the banks of the Nile. The first stages of Stonehenge rise up in ancient Britain. And back in Samaria, artificial temple mounds called ziggurats climb ever higher toward the heavens. To cement these massive structures together, the builders of Samaria turned to a substance that oozes from seepages along the Euphrates River. It's called bitumen. Used as asphalt in the modern world, it is the first petroleum product to be exploited by mankind. While bitumen is highly prized, the lighter, thinner substance oozing from the ground along with it is considered a nuisance by the ancients because it catches fire so easily. The ancients call it naphtha. We call it gasoline. And it's one of the first indications of the vast oil fields that will one day turn the cradle of civilization into a center of wealth and warfare. The legacy of these first civilizations can be seen in surprising ways. The Sumerian counting system was based on the number 12 rather than 10, which is why we divide our days into two 12-hour blocks, our hours into 60 minutes, and our minutes into 60 seconds. The Sumerians also likely invented the wheel, which eventually leads to another innovation that will change the course of man, the chariot.
Thus bringing together the Sumerian invention of the wheel, right, with the domestication of the horse that had occurred amongst these nomadic peoples into this really formidable piece of military technology.
Around 1200 BC, a chariot-driven clash of civilizations cuts off trade routes for copper and tin, the metals we need to make bronze tools and weapons. But luckily, the stars have made us an alternative: iron. Now, metalsmiths make a crucial discovery. By working at higher temperatures, they can release the power of this ancient metal. Easier to sharpen and 700 times more common on Earth than copper. It is a game changer. Humanity enters the Iron Age. As we reach the first millennium BC, history has taken us on a wild ride. From the initial blast of the Big Bang, to the formation of Earth and its first creatures, and the rise of man. We've seen the Ice Age create bridges to spread mankind around the world, then strand us on different continents, leaving us to survive on what we have at hand. So by 1000 BC, the world remains a divided place. The trade network that connects much of Eurasia and North Africa doesn't yet penetrate the planet's driest deserts or cross the vastest oceans. Cut off by geography are people in places like sub-Saharan Africa and the Americas. With few easy to domesticate plants and animals of their own, they remain tied to more ancient ways of life. In 600 BC, the cavalry have arrived. Humans ride into battle on horseback for the first time. We've seen that just taming a horse gives man a massive advantage. Now, pairing him with iron weapons makes him nearly unstoppable.
These advances in technology, they don't just make a fighting ability possible. They make empires possible.
And that is the story of the next several millennia. With new technology and improved logistics, empires spread, uniting massive land areas under a central control. As empires grow, so do new beliefs.
One interesting phenomenon we see with the rise of these empires is this idea of monotheism, this idea of a universal God that develops over time, and it's just a phenomenon.
Judaism emerges, from which we eventually get Christianity and Islam. Buddhism and Hinduism also arise. The 5 major religions today are all rooted in this remarkable era. Although empires spread, some great powers remain isolated. The rise of the Himalayas 50 million years earlier has left China cut off from trading with the rest of the world. But that is about to change. Around 100 BC, a Chinese emperor sends an envoy to the west in search of alliances. The routes he travels will become the Silk Roads, a massive trade network that connects China across Central Asia to the Roman Empire. China has joined the world.
As far as we know, no Chinese trader ever met a Roman, no Roman ever met a Chinese trader, at least during this first period of the Silk Roads. But this vast trade then began to explode. Between about 100 BC and about 200 AD, we have 3 centuries of trade and cultural exchange on a level that has not been seen before in human history.
But this new human network also unleashes hidden dangers. By the beginning of the Common Era, great empires have risen and a massive trading network connects most of Europe and Asia. But the trade routes also carry an invisible threat. Disease. Massive epidemics that some blame for taking down both the Roman Empire and China's Han Dynasty. But these networks also lead to the spread of religion. In 312 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity, paving the way for it to become the dominant religion of Europe and the West. Three centuries later, Islam also emerges. A religion that will, for a time, unify a territory 2.5 times larger than Rome ever was. Arab trade will drive innovation for the next 1,000 years and expand the global network to places it has never gone before.
The Arabs are sitting in the middle of Afro-Eurasia. There are Arab traders who are sailing off to China. There are Arab traders who are traveling all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. So they are sitting in the middle of the hub.
One secret to Arab trade: the camel. A creature whose ancestor, like the horse, escaped across the Bering Land Bridge out of North America. A caravan of 6 camels can lug as much as 2 tons of cargo as far as 60 miles a day. Twice the load of a donkey caravan in half the time. For the first time, camel caravans open up reliable trade routes across the formidable Sahara Desert, leading to the formation of the first states in West Africa. Arabic trade expands, moving salt from the Sahara to Rome, rice from Eastern Asia to India, the secrets of making paper out of China into Europe, and countless other inventions and ideas around the world.
Where does our word for lemon come from? Where does our word for coffee come from? They're all Arabic, because the Arabs brought a huge number of food crops into Europe. Oranges, citrus crops, they come from South China. Yet they don't make it to the West until the Great Age of the Arabs.
In Islamic North Africa, one Italian merchant named Leonardo Fibonacci becomes well schooled in the ways of Arab traders. He picks up on a simple but ingenious counting system that originated in India but is used extensively in the Arab world. His writings will spread this knowledge to Europe and around the globe. With everyone counting the same way, business and trade will explode. And because of Fibonacci, people today still almost universally use the numbers known as Arabic numerals. But there is another idea Arab traders will spread, something even more influential. It originates in China around 800 AD. A Chinese alchemist in search of an elixir for long life instead stumbles upon chemistry that can bring sudden death. He combines carbon and sulfur with saltpeter, a compound made of potassium, nitrogen, and oxygen. Forged in the stars, these elements now come together to make gunpowder. The recipe for gunpowder eventually moves west across the Silk Roads to the Islamic world, where Muslim warriors use it to fire cannonballs at Christian crusaders. Europeans pick up on the idea, embracing and perfecting gunpowder weapons. In 1492 AD. There are roughly 400 million people in the world, but it is still divided in two. In the Americas, the civilizations of the Aztecs, Mayans, and Incas have all arisen. While halfway around the world, in the aftermath of the fall of Rome, Europe has cracked like an egg into individual states. For Italian-born Christopher Columbus, this means he can appeal for funding from a succession of European rulers, until he finally convinces the King and Queen of Spain to back his expeditions. It has taken all of Earth's history to make Columbus's journey possible. For tacking into the wind, he uses triangular sails, a technology copied from the Arabs. To guide him, the compass, an invention from China. And guiding the needle, a magnetic field formed with the core of the planet itself. Although Columbus is looking for a new way to sail to India, what he does instead is finally and forever connect the two halves of the world. The voyage is not just significant in American history. As you'll see, it's a pivotal event in all of human history. Nothing will ever be the same. The end of the Ice Age marooned large pockets of humanity on separate sides of the globe for over 15,000 years. Now, that's all about to change.
The voyage of Christopher Columbus in 1492 is taught as one of the most significant events in American history. In fact, it's one of the most significant events in all of human history. Prior to that voyage, the great world zones had existed largely in isolation. By crossing the Atlantic, Columbus opens up the vast American world zone, these two enormous continents of North and South America, with the millions of people that are living there, the resources that are available. And for the first time, people living in Eurasia become aware of this other part of the world. Until the voyage of Columbus, these people may as well have been living on different planets, so isolated were they.
A trade network that started with the first civilizations, connected Europe, Asia, and Africa, now reaches across the Atlantic. In this vast new global network, new hubs will form. And once again, power will shift.
For most of the last 2,000 years, Europe hasn't been that important. Then we get the age of Columbus, and what do you know? This is exactly the time where we see the rise of the West. This is when the West starts taking over, when it gets itself smack bang in the middle of the biggest exchange network the world has ever seen.
Now, foods that had been isolated on disconnected continents begin to move around the world. Maize from the Americas shows up in Egypt and China. Potatoes from the Andes prove perfectly suited to the soils of Ireland and Russia. The old Fertile Crescent grains, like wheat, begin to feed the Americas. New foods mean more calories, more energy. Within 3 centuries of Columbus's voyage, the population of the world will more than double to 900 million. But the unequal hands dealt to the 2 hemispheres now play out in a deadly climax. European conquistadors, inheritors of the agriculture and animals of the Fertile Crescent, and the trade spread along the vast networks of the Old World, come bearing guns, riding horses, and carrying infectious diseases. The result, slaughter. In the years following Columbus's first voyage, 95% of the native population in the Americas will die from European guns and germs. Once the hemispheres are connected, nothing can ever be the same. Take the incredible story of sugar. Chemically, it's the only source of fuel for our brains, a substance we are programmed to crave. Raw sugar comes mostly from sugar cane. Once again, a grass will play a central role in the story of mankind. First cultivated more than 6,000 years ago in Asia, Europeans discovered sugar in the Middle East during the Crusades and carried it home. Europe was hooked. But there's virtually nowhere in Europe where sugar can grow.
Then we have Christopher Columbus and the discovery of the New World. And the Spanish conquistadors, yes, they initially are very interested in the gold and the silver, but really, they just want to make it rich. They don't care how they're going to make it rich. And once the gold and the silver has been looted, the next step is to open sugar plantations. The Spanish themselves don't want to work in the sugar plantations. They start looking around for a new labor force. And over on the other side of the Atlantic, there is a place where they can buy slaves. And if we look at the history of slavery, the #1 destination of slaves from Africa are sugar plantations. So the history of sugar shapes the development of history through the Middle East, through the Crusades, through the conquest of Mesoamerica, and even the history of slavery from Africa to the Americas.
In the year 1700, mankind has hit a wall. Most humans continue to live simple lives, more like our ancient ancestors than our own.
When you think back to the world in 1700, most people were farmers, most people practiced small-scale subsistence agriculture, most manufacturing was done in workshops.
In 1700, it takes over a year for cargo and information to circle the planet, longer than it would take us today to get to Mars. What's holding us back is how we power our lives. In Egypt of 2000 BC, 90% of all work was done by human muscle, with animals kicking in the rest. By 1700 in Europe, the majority of work, 70%, is still driven by human muscle. Muscle power alone can't clear the path to the modern age. But there's a breakthrough hidden deep within the earth. As our history of the world in 2 hours races towards a close, mankind has hit a wall. Human progress is stalled by the limits of our muscle. To break through, we'll need a new way to power our lives and the entire history of the world. Remember that billions of years ago, iron from exploding stars was gathered up into planet Earth during its formation. Thousands of years ago, man started using this iron for tools and weapons. To keep our forges burning, we began cutting down our forests. Now, 300 years ago in Britain, iron is in high demand, and the trees are running out. The British need a new source of fuel, and thanks to the decayed remains of ancient ferns, they have one. Coal. But coal itself won't power mankind into the modern world. There's one more fateful twist in the story. As the quest for coal takes miners ever deeper into the ground, water begins flooding the tunnels. To pump out the water, a new invention is needed. In 1712, Thomas Newcomen produces a pump powered by burning coal and driven by steam. Newcomen's machine is the first practical steam engine. It is this combination, energy and engine, fuel and machine, that will free man from the limits of his own muscle and change the world. The Industrial Revolution begins. Along with political revolutions in America and later France, this technological revolution forever transforms the landscape of the world.
And before long, the Atlantic world has become the new economic, therefore cultural, therefore political, therefore military leader, and will utterly dominate global geopolitics from that moment to this.
Trains thunder across the countryside. By the 1870s, the internal combustion engine has arrived, and the Germans invent its killer app, the automobile. Oil, the substance which the ancients considered too flammable to be of any use, becomes the most important commodity on the planet, fueling even more innovation. The telegraph and telephone move messages at lightning speed. With electricity, mankind reclaims the night from darkness. The hub of power has shifted. In 1800, Europeans and their descendants controlled 35% of the land on Earth. By 1900, they control 85%. By the 20th century, fossil fuels and the internal combustion engine have amplified everything, including warfare.
That technology meant that military power and military conquest was something that could be international in a way that it had never been before.
In the 20th century, almost 3 times as many people are killed as a result of war as in the previous 2,000 years of human history combined.
The application of the industrial skills, the industrial technologies of the 18th century reached their culmination, I think, with these extraordinary events. And it's all being driven again by the micro-fossilized bodies of organic entities that disappeared into ancient swamps millions and millions of years ago.
The Industrial Revolution also allows the human population to explode. It has taken 200,000 years of human history, from the dawn of man to the year 1900, for the population to reach 1.6 billion. Now, within the 100 years of the 20th century, it nearly quadruples to more than 6 billion.
The 20th century is the most extraordinary moment in human history. Never before have we seen change on such a scale.
Today, humans number close to 7 billion. we are the dominant players on the planet. We have learned to harness 50,000 times more energy than our ancestors just 10,000 years ago. This energy drives our fast-paced lives and a literal worldwide web, a network that, as we have seen, has been in the making for as long as humans have walked the earth. Our 2-hour story is coming to an end. A story that really began 14 billion years ago with a tiny universe where everything was all in one place. Then the Big Bang. All the energy that has ever existed created in an instant. Gravity sculpted our universe. For billions of years, stars and supernovas created all the elements we would eventually need. Then an extreme Earth took shape and settled into just the right conditions to support life. As the planet evolved, life competed for energy and grew more and more complex. Eventually, the conditions were right for our species to rise. We mastered stone and fire. When the Ice Age came, we spread around the planet. And when the ice melted, we were stranded on different continents. We learned to bend plants and animals to our will. We built cities, then civilizations. We created a vast network that linked empires, joined continents, then crossed oceans. Just when it seemed we had reached our human limit, we found the energy and technology to carry us into the future. On Earth, the seeds of the past have bloomed into a present filled with energy and creativity. The stories of billions of lives have played out against the backdrop of a universe almost too vast to comprehend. In everything that we do, in all that we are, we remain living monuments to the past as we continue to make history every day.